For more on it, Juliette Touma joins me now live from Amman. She's the Communications Director for the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. Juliette, we're seeing these pictures of these tents completely ripped up after months of use, bad weather, Israeli attacks. What's the situation in terms of getting aid, in terms particularly of things like tents, into Gaza right now?
Extremely difficult. Supplies are running very, very short. This is due to the siege that has been imposed on the Gaza Strip for more than 15 months. Very small number of trucks are allowed into Gaza, on average between 60 to 80 humanitarian trucks a day, which is by far not enough in the face of massive humanitarian needs on the ground.
And how has your ability to operate at UNRWA been affected by Israeli policy, the Israeli decision to ban UNRWA?
Well, look, the clock is ticking very fast towards the implementation of a bill that the Israeli parliament has passed. And this is due to come into effect on the 30th of January. Now, if this bill is implemented, then our ability to deliver humanitarian assistance in places like Gaza, but also the occupied West Bank, is going to be very, very limited, if not at all hampered or restricted.
So what will you actually have to do? Will your teams have to pull out completely from Gaza if they're not Palestinian, or what happens?
Our teams are committed to stay and deliver across the Gaza Strip and in the occupied West Bank. You see, in the occupied West Bank, as one example, we have schools that provide education for 50,000 boys and girls that go to United Nations schools. So we are committed to staying and delivering, and we do hope that there will be a cancellation of that bill that was passed a few months ago.
And at this point, 15 months into the conflict in Gaza, sometimes it feels like we have done all the reporting on how bad the situation is. We've seen the most terrible of things that we could possibly see, and yet it continues to get worse. What are your biggest fears for the people of Gaza going forward into 2025?
Well, we do demand a ceasefire immediately. That ceasefire is going to bring respite to people inside Gaza, but also in Israel. There needs to be a release of all the hostages. Meanwhile, the war continues. It continues unabated, with a huge number of civilians that are caught in the middle. Civilians, including children, women, older people, get killed on a daily basis. Medical facilities are being surrounded and besieged. Medical staff and humanitarian staff are being detained. So we're calling for a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and the release of all humanitarian medical staff who are detained.
But what about your worries in terms of people living there and stuck there if there is no ceasefire? I mean, just in terms of one thing, famine, for example, we've seen the whole of the Gaza Strip now under a category 4 of famine, and that looking like it may move more broadly towards a category 5 if indeed there is no ceasefire, if indeed the aid situation doesn't change. How worried are you? Just quantify it. Explain for me what your fears are.
I think we're past the threshold of being worried a very, very long time ago. What is happening in Gaza is unprecedented. It's one of the most brutal wars in recent history. The humanitarian indicators on the ground, whether it's hunger, whether it's lack of safe water, whether it's lack of shelter, are absolutely huge. There needs to be a ceasefire and an increase in the flow and the delivery of humanitarian supplies to people who need it most in Gaza.
All right, Juliette Touma, Communications Director at UNRWA, thank you so much for joining us on the NewsHour.